Imagine this. What if the very things you've been trying to avoid, your fears, your self-doubt, the old wounds you'd rather forget, aren't just obstacles, but signposts pointing you toward your deepest sense of purpose? Carl Jung, the legendary psychoanalyst, once said that the shadow, the dark side of our psyche, is where the forgotten fragments of ourselves reside. These aren't just negative traits or shameful memories. They include repressed strengths, buried desires, and hidden potential we've denied because of fear, social conditioning, or past trauma. The paradox: that very darkness may contain the seeds of our most profound transformation. Have you ever overreacted to someone's behavior? Felt unexplainably irritated or even repulsed by someone without fully understanding why? Jung believed that moments like these could be glimpses of your shadow being projected onto others. What we refuse to accept in ourselves often shows up in those around us, making us uncomfortable. His famous quote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves," isn't just a thought-provoking idea. It's an invitation to face ourselves with courage and honesty. In today's world, we're often taught that personal growth means eliminating the negative. But Jung offered a different approach. Instead of running from the darkness, try turning toward it, not to surrender to it, but to understand it. When you start asking, "What am I hiding?" or "Why does this trigger me so much?" you're not just exploring your shadow, you're taking the first steps on the path of individuation. It's the journey of becoming whole, authentic, and deeply aligned with who you truly are. And maybe, just maybe, the parts of yourself you once rejected are the very places where the answer to your lifelong question has been quietly waiting. What was I born to do? As you begin the journey of exploring the darkness within, one of the first and often most painful realizations is how long you've been living disconnected from your true self. Carl Jung called this the inner split, when the outer self, the persona, the mask we wear to fit in, to be accepted, gradually becomes a shell that obscures our authentic being. Over time, the gap between who we truly are and the image we try so hard to maintain grows wider, leaving us feeling empty, lost and adrift. But darkness isn't just a wound, it's an untapped treasure. Imagine an artist who only paints with bright colors. Their work might be beautiful, but it lacks depth, contrast, and emotional weight. In the same way, a life that refuses to confront its darker layers, its anger, jealousy, fear, and pain, lacks truth. And from that truth, something miraculous can begin to unfold. Healing. Jung called this process individuation, the path to becoming a whole, integrated self, where light and shadow no longer fight for dominance, but exist side by side like two halves of a single circle. This doesn't mean acting on every emotion or impulse. Rather, it's about learning to understand them, to see the roles they've played in your personal journey. Sometimes anger is nothing more than unacknowledged helplessness. Sometimes envy is the cry of a forgotten part of you, a part still longing to live, to shine. Individuation is not a destination, it's a lifelong unfolding. Every time you dare to face the darkness and ask, "What are you trying to tell me?" you open a door not only to understanding, but to freedom. The deepest kind of freedom, to be fully, unapologetically yourself. If the journey of individuation begins with recognizing the shadow, then the next step is dialogue, not with the outside world, but with the abandoned parts within you. Carl Jung encouraged his patients to do something that might seem strange at first, to imagine their shadow as a separate being, and then talk to it. Ask it questions like, "Where did you come from? What are you protecting me from? What do you want me to learn from this pain?" At first, this may feel confusing. How do you speak to the ugly parts of yourself, the parts you were taught to suppress, to deny? But it is through this very dialogue that a deeper awareness begins to unfold. The shadow is never your enemy. It's simply the part of you that was never allowed to exist, and it's not there to destroy. It's there to guide. Think of those moments when you lashed out in anger for a clear reason, felt a surge of hurt that seemed out of proportion, or found yourself irrationally irritated by someone. Those reactions aren't nonsense, they're signals. They're telling you that some part of you has been forgotten, and it's trying to be heard in the only way it knows how. Maybe it's a fear of abandonment. Maybe it's the feeling of never being enough. Maybe it's a childhood dream that was shut down too early. When you begin to listen instead of judge, you don't just find truth, you find compassion. And from that place, healing begins. Not by fixing yourself, but by embracing yourself. Just like a dark room can't be chased away with hatred, it lights up when you turn on the lamp. Your inner darkness doesn't need to be erased. It only needs to be seen, understood, and loved in the right way. That's the turning point of inner maturity, when you stop trying to become some ideal version of yourself to meet others' expectations and instead begin to become your true self, not perfect, but real. Once you've dared to face your shadow and begun a dialogue with it, the next lesson is subtle but vital: learning to accept without identifying. This distinction is delicate, yet it holds immense power. Acceptance doesn't mean giving in or justifying every impulse. It means seeing clearly without judgment that every emotion, every trait, no matter how negative it may seem, has a reason for being. These parts of you don't arise to destroy you. They're pointing toward where you've been hurt, where healing is still needed, where you once abandoned yourself. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In other words, you don't grow simply by clinging to lofty ideals or thinking positively. You grow by bravely walking through the unlit parts of your story, by asking, what am I hiding? Why am I reacting this way? What am I truly needing that I'm too afraid to admit? This isn't easy. Sometimes it shatters what you thought you knew about yourself. Beliefs like, I must be strong, I can't be wrong, I don't deserve love. These aren't truths, they're protective armor. And yet in that crumbling, there's a chance to be reborn. You begin to see yourself with gentler eyes. You no longer view sensitivity as weakness, anger as failure, or exhaustion as defeat. You begin to understand that these are simply signals, reminders that you are human. And being human means being complex, being contradictory, and also being endlessly capable of healing and growth. From this place, you no longer have to wage war within yourself. Instead, you learn to live alongside all your inner parts, both the light and the shadow, as essential pieces of a complete picture. And it is that wholeness, not perfection, that becomes the foundation for a life that is honest, rich, and deeply meaningful. Once you begin to accept the shadow within you as a natural part of your being, something profound starts to happen. You realize that everything you once labeled a problem in your life was actually an invitation to grow. These weren't wrong turns, they were detours that brought you closer to your true self. Carl Jung once said that the purpose of life isn't about seeking something outside of yourself. It's about becoming who you truly are. And to do that, you must come to see that reality as you experience it isn't absolute. It's a map drawn from your beliefs, memories, wounds, and expectations. It's like a movie where you are both the main character and the director. Only you've forgotten that you can rewrite the script. When you begin to observe how you react to the world, who triggers you, what scares you, what draws you in or pushes you away, you stop being a passive recipient of your experience. You become its creator. And in that shift, you discover a deep truth. The outer world is not your enemy. It's a mirror reflecting your inner world. From this perspective, the things that once hurt you become your teachers. What once brought shame becomes creative fuel, and the parts of you that you once rejected, your dreams, your passions, your longing to be seen, can now be welcomed back. Not to take over, but to walk beside you. The journey of reconstructing your reality doesn't require you to become someone else. It simply asks you to peel away the layers that have hidden who you already are. And when you do that, you don't just exist, you live with intention. Every choice becomes more deliberate, every relationship becomes more real. And life itself, instead of being a series of unconscious reactions, becomes a meaningful act of creation, where you are the artist painting the most honest portrait of your soul. And then somewhere along that journey, there comes a moment, not dazzling or cinematic, like some movie-style epiphany, but quiet, unassuming, and deeply real. You awaken, not through a thunderclap or some miracle outside of yourself, but through a subtle shift within. One day you simply notice that you're seeing life through different eyes. No longer the hurried gaze of fear, no longer the judgmental stare of the ego, but a softer look, one of presence, understanding, and a quiet refusal to keep running. Carl Jung called this the awakening from the darkness, a process that isn't linear, isn't easily measured, but is undeniably expansive with each step. You begin to question not just the world outside, but the deep-rooted beliefs that have silently steered your life for years. Why do I believe I'm not enough? Who told me that emotions are weakness? Am I living my life or someone else's? Awakening isn't a destination, it's a living process, a kind of daily clarity, a choice you make in each moment. And yes, there will be times when it feels lonely, because this path isn't easily understood and not everyone is ready to walk it. But in that loneliness, something beautiful happens. You begin to recognize those who are tuned to the same frequency, souls who are also peeling away the masks, who are all stumbling their way out of their own shadows. You begin to see that real connection doesn't come from sameness. It comes from the courage to face truth together. When you dare to live authentically, you give others permission to do the same. And from there, relationships are no longer built on need or roles, but on something deeply human, a resonance where both the light and the shadow are seen, understood, and accepted. That is the miracle of awakening, not to separate you from the world, but to return you to it, more present, more loving, and no longer afraid to be fully unapologetically yourself. As you continue walking the path of awakening, moving through the shadows, shedding the masks, and seeing yourself with unflinching honesty, something else begins to reveal itself. You no longer have to fight to be who you are. Instead, you start to feel lighter, not because the world has changed, but because you've stopped carrying the weight of having to prove anything. Maybe in the past, your sensitivity felt like a burden. Maybe your wounds felt like weaknesses. Maybe you even hated how intensely you felt things, but now you begin to see the truth. None of that ever made you small. They were the very gateways to your authenticity. Pain forced you to stop living halfway. Sensitivity allowed you to notice what others missed, and the very wounds that once brought you to your knees are now the reason you understand life and others with such depth and compassion. Carl Jung once said, The modern man doesn't see the problem lies within. He has lost his soul, and when you finally dare to face your inner darkness, to let what's been buried speak, you don't just find yourself. You reclaim your soul. There's no more rushing to fix yourself, no more pressure to become someone else, just to be loved. You learn to simply be in this breath, this moment, with all that life is moving through you. You no longer need immediate answers. You don't need to wrap everything up in a conclusion. You just need to be here fully, honestly, wholly. And in that presence, you discover something both simple and profound. Peace doesn't come from the absence of darkness, but from no longer fearing it. You begin to live as if no part of you needs to be cut away. And when you live like that, life responds. It mirrors back that freedom through new people, new opportunities, and connections more genuine than you ever thought possible. And then from the intersection of awakening and presence, you begin to sense something even deeper. Pain isn't just something to be healed. It's the very material from which a meaningful life is crafted. This marks a quiet yet powerful turning point on the inner journey, when you stop trying to simply get over your pain and instead begin to transform it. Many people believe healing ends when the pain disappears, but the truth is the deepest pain rarely goes away completely. It stays not to torment you, but to become part of your growth. Like a scar, it no longer bleeds, but it reminds you that you lived, that you endured, and that you learned something invaluable. Carl Jung once said, "The wound is where the light enters you." That line isn't just poetic, it's a truth that reminds us our most fragile broken places are also our strongest bridges to the world, not through achievement or perfection, but through honesty. Think of the people who've inspired you. They weren't untouched by struggle. They were the ones who stumbled, who hurt, who stood back up and chose to use their story to offer something meaningful to others. Maybe an artist who turned loneliness into song, an activist who transformed outrage into justice, a quiet soul who used empathy to heal others simply by being present. And you too. Maybe you don't yet know what you'll do. But when you dare to live truthfully with your darkness, your pain, your longings, and your uncertainty, you are planting seeds for a life of depth. You don't need to be extraordinary. You don't need to stand out. You just need to be real and let life continue the story from that place of truth. Because sometimes the very things that once broke you become the bridge that connects you to others who are also trying to find their way. And who knows, maybe the light you carry from your own shadows will be the first glimpse of hope someone else sees in their night. And when you've walked through the darkness, when you no longer see pain as the enemy, but as an old companion, you begin to sense something new taking shape within you: balance. Not the tug of war between I must be good and I mustn't be bad. Not the clash between light and shadow, ego and soul, but a deep harmony where even your weakest and strongest parts are finally sitting at the same table. Carl Jung called this the whole self of self, no longer divided, no longer denying any piece of who you are. In this state, you no longer need to perform. You no longer feel the pressure to appear fine, strong, or appropriate. You no longer strain to fit into someone else's mold, because now you know every part of you has a place: confidence and fear, big dreams and quiet wounds. They all belong in the story you're here to live. True maturity isn't measured by how many flaws you've eliminated or how many mistakes you've conquered. It's measured by whether you can look yourself in the eye and still hold that gaze with unconditional love. And once you do that for yourself, you begin to open up to others in a whole new way. Not out of need, not out of a desperate longing to be loved, but from a deep empathy. I see you because I've been there too. In a world where everyone is trying so hard to prove they're enough, someone who lives authentically, who embraces both light and shadow, is a quiet force of healing. No grand speeches, no need to explain. Just by being present, they remind us, you don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be you. That is the greatest gift of inner growth. You stop living to become someone else. You live to become yourself fully, deeply, and without fragmentation. And from that place, every step you take, every soul you touch, carries something rare. A quiet truth that speaks not loudly, but directly to the heart. And then after peeling back enough layers, navigating enough inner storms, and enduring enough long nights face-to-face with herself, you come to a simple yet profound realization. Meaning doesn't come from everything being perfect. It comes from your ability to remain present in the midst of imperfection. In a chaotic world where everyone is rushing, where pressure, expectations, and the daily fear of inadequacy close in, it is an act of quiet rebellion just to stay connected to yourself. Carl Jung once said, "Man is not suffering so much from pain, but from a lack of meaning." We're not only worn out by work, relationships, or responsibilities. We're exhausted by the sense of being lost within it all. We try to do well to move forward, to keep going, yet deep inside there's an emptiness, one that no amount of success, money, or validation can truly fill. But from that very emptiness comes an invitation to return. Not to the past, but to your deepest essence, the part of you that isn't a role or a label, but a living, breathing presence trying to make sense of the chaos. When you learn to slow down, to listen and observe yourself, you begin to realize you don't need to chase every noise out there. You don't need all the answers. What you do need is to stay rooted in that quiet center, within a place where you can stand in the storm and not lose yourself. That is the gift of the shadow journey. Not a flawless life, but a deep one. A life that is grateful for both the light and the dark. A life that knows when to pause and listen, and how to move forward with strength that comes from within. And when you live like that, you don't just change your own life. You become a quiet anchor for others, still searching for solid ground. In this world, sometimes the most meaningful thing isn't to speak loudly, but to be deeply. Not to rescue others, but to touch another soul simply through the wholeness of your presence. And then after living long enough in presence, in depth, in the capacity to embrace both light and shadow, you come to one final truth. A truth so simple, yet so transformative, it changes everything. This journey was never just for you. Your healing isn't only so you can live a better life, it's so you can become an awakened thread in the invisible web that connects all of humanity. Carl Jung believed that every person who embarks on the path of individuation, the journey to becoming whole and authentic, is helping to shift the collective unconscious. Because every time you face your own shadow and stop projecting it onto others, you're not only reducing the conflict within yourself, you're lessening the fragmentation in the world. Imagine a world where people look inward before casting blame. Where anger isn't suppressed or unleashed blindly, but transformed into meaningful action. A world where we don't just survive, but seek to understand, to connect, to heal. If enough people lived that way, the world wouldn't change through force or slogans, but through the quiet, steady presence of souls who have come home to themselves. You might think the inner journey is small, too insignificant to matter, get to. But remember this. Every profound change in human history has started inside one person, one individual who dared to walk differently, to ask questions, to not repeat the path handed down to them. And now that person is you. No one is asking you to save the world, but through the way you live honestly, deeply, compassionately with yourself, you send out a ripple of awakening. No fanfare, no applause, but others, those tired souls still searching, still stumbling, still breaking, may feel it. Just by your presence, you become a light. And that is the silent yet mighty power of the shadow journey. It turns you into a keeper of the flame. Not a wildfire meant to burn the world down, but a small, steady ember warm enough to soothe another soul shivering in the dark. And sometimes that alone is enough to start a revolution. The journey has no end, only a return. And now, when all the veils have been lifted, when light and shadow no longer stand in opposition but walk side by side, we finally understand this journey was never about becoming someone. It was always about coming home to yourself. No longer a desperate chase for perfection or ultimate enlightenment, but a series of deeply human moments where you simply learn to stay with yourself as you are. Carl Jung didn't just give the world profound concepts in psychology, he left behind a spiritual legacy. Become who you truly are, read quickly. It may sound simple, but to truly live, it is one of the most challenging and liberating acts of all. Because to live honestly means shedding every mask, every expectation, every role you've taken on just to be loved or accepted. And in their place, choosing to be real. Raw, whole, but free. The journey through shadow isn't for the impatient. It isn't linear, it has no clear map, and it certainly doesn't offer instant rewards. But every step, no matter how small, carries a quiet power. It brings you closer to your soul. And then, one day you'll realize, it's not that light is always stronger than darkness. It's that when you no longer fear the dark, that's when you truly shine. Not because you've stopped hurting, but because you've learned how to walk with your wounds as part of your story, not as your identity and ending. This isn't an ending. This is a gentle reminder that you can pause at any moment to breathe, to listen, to be. You don't have to go far to find meaning. It's always been here inside you, in the quiet moments, in the stillness, in the ability to look into the mirror and say, I see you, I accept you, and I'm staying with you. So if you're somewhere on this path, whether just beginning or far along, know this, you are not alone. And every step you take, every choice to live honestly, to turn inward, to choose truth over pretense, is a sacred act, a quiet declaration I have chosen myself. And sometimes that alone is enough to change an entire life.